audience, because we spoke to him a few weeks ago, but things have moved on since then, and I think it's probably probably time we had an update, because barely a day goes by when we don't hear something about mental health in the workplace, and ever more so in hospitality as well. There's some scary stats out there, I think. Gary, is that a vase of flowers? Is that you're on mute? I think you're on mute. Yeah, a little bit.
I'm mute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. I ran a large pint glass of water there.
You sure it's not gin and tonic?
Yeah.
Yeah, water.
Could be,
yeah.
Could be that.
It's 4 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock.
That's a good point. Well, so Gary, just really just to see if you're able just to give us an overview of what you're seeing out there, because for anyone who doesn't know Gary, he's founder of the Mindfulness Enterprise, and they work with companies in all sectors across Scotland and the UK to help them realise the benefits of mindfulness and positive mental health in the workplace. So Gary, could you give us a wee overview on what you're finding at the moment, especially in hospitality?
Sure, yeah. I've put a few slides together, but I want to keep it quite conversational, so we can, or we don't have to use them, but maybe just I can just talk through some of the kind of key headlines, I guess. As we're all aware, this is a continuing, unfolding drama, if you like, because there's lots of new things that are emerging all the time from government, and I think people are finding that they're, getting taken through the washing machine in terms of what's coming next. But some of the key things, I guess, around just in general, which will be affecting the population, including those involved in hospitality and employees, etc., is that the studies shown that there's about an 8% rise in clinically significant levels of mental distress across the population, and that figure, predominantly, through the lockdown period, where companies like, organisations like the Lancet have done some research on from a household perspective. So 8% was the rough figure there, and what they had noticed from that was that the indicators of the increase in stress and anxiety were predominantly amongst the young people, 18 to 24, and those at home with families, particularly women, actually reporting quite higher increases than males. And again, probably, as I say, because of the challenges with homeschooling and all the other factors there probably having an impact. But also there are other situations being reported in terms of an increase in domestic abuse, which could be impacting females as well. And so I think these are kind of some of the things that are emerging. There's also an increase in reported substance misuse as well, and again, coming down to just the kind of underlying emotional strain that people are under, depending on the circumstances, which is leading to people making choices that are giving them some quick relief, which might not be great longer term. So I think there has been a trending increase in substance misuse, and with the lockdown and people spending lots of time at home, I think there's a lot of businesses that have picked up on that, and there's people who have been quite open and forthcoming about the fact that they have noticed that they have started to fall into some bad habits. So there is going to be some behavioural health related issues that are definitely out there just now and will continue to emerge, I would have thought. But again, it's impacting everybody in different ways. And as we know, people who are living in poverty, people who have pre-existing conditions, people whose home life, was difficult, but perhaps were managing to just get through it because they weren't at home as much, now are at home much more often, 24/7, and these issues have been heightened, brought into sharper focus. So there's lots of associated impacts on stress and anxiety and depression on the back of all these kind of different factors. So these are kind of the main things that we're seeing. There was, there was some discussion about increase in suicide rates and things like that, but I think more it's probably there was some inaccurate reporting out there regarding suicide numbers, but what seems to be clear is that there has been an increase. About 10% of the UK population had declared that they'd been experiencing suicidal thoughts or feelings over this period, and there's no doubt that if we look back at previous recessions like the one in 2007, 2008, and the impacts of that, there was marked increases in suicides, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, just through people's livelihoods being impacted, and all the factors that unfold from that. So there's no doubt that this situation, for me, we're not really seeing probably the real true impact of it yet, because certainly the impacts to economy and loss of jobs and the knock-on impacts to that will keep unfolding as the months go by, and we don't actually know what is coming next in terms of are we going to go back into lockdowns? There's already some localized lockdowns happening. Whether that goes back into harder lockdown for more people, where does that leave businesses and employees and furlough schemes coming to the end and all these kind of things. So there's lots of implications here of how this could really impact people. I don't know what you guys are seeing, from the ground. Is business slow, I would imagine, in many respects, to kind of pick up, and it'd be good to just get a little bit of an insight from you guys as well, what you're noticing.
Thanks, Gary. No, that's some real insight into what's at the moment. The caterer's perspective, Kenny's operations director for Thomas Franks in Scotland. And so we'll be at the coalface in terms of clients that are operating now, but in a different capacity to the pre-virus times. Kenny?
Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yes, I think from our side of things, there just seems to be a lot more sensitivity around quite a lot of subjects that probably wasn't there before. I think people are probably struggling to cope a little bit. I know personally, from a personal point of view, having gone through, not being in a lot of contact with people and one-to-one, to go from that to pretty much everything. So our teams, it seems like, are struggling to cope with basic things that they would have just brushed off before. And there's a few more issues that raise their heads. So there's a bit more going on with HR and support-wise, but we've had in different places, different schools. One's gone through a restructure, so which involved pretty much all the team, and to get them all to come back to work. But I think daily briefings, post-service, pre-service, I think we just being in touch with our staff. It's very difficult not to, because you can't touch people. Normally you could, you feely type of person, but you can't kind of go near people, and you have to kind of keep your distance. Yeah. So it has been a bit tricky. All the schools have gone back, luckily not all on the same day, but one last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 last week, and on the whole, it's gone quite well. But it's our clients want more, the kids want more, the teachers want more, and whereas before we were feeding everyone in one environment in the dining room, now we're having to really think on our feet and deliver food to a separate area for teachers, do some packed meals, do some, so it's really been full on from the first minute, and some people have probably struggled more than most. So it's been a bit tricky getting to a Friday. I totally get your point, Gary. What you're saying about you're almost like, oh, is it Friday yet? Can I have some gin? Can I drink wine tonight? It's only Wednesday.
Yeah.
And you can easily get in that habit of going home. You've had such a stressful day. You think, I'll just have a couple of gins and I'll just have a glass of wine. So I can totally relate to that. And I think it's just keeping an eye on people and just checking in with them and having good managers that are doing that and they know their teams. So from our point of view, that's where we're at. But I know it's been a struggle for more than most.
Thanks, Kenny. Thanks very much indeed. Gordon, because you've got more knowledge of this than most of us, other than Gary, maybe. How are you finding it from the charity's perspective? You must be seeing an increase, are you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Alex. It's interesting that what I would say, and we had a trustees meeting just last week, and what I'm hearing from the guys who are out in the businesses are saying is staff are actually very anxious. The ones who've got their jobs are very anxious because they're coming back to work and they're sometimes having to deal with customers who maybe not quite as patient as they might be. They're not as understanding of the COVID regs, and if they're being questioned on something, or there's a delay because of whatever it might well be, it seems that the customers are causing them more stress than maybe they did before. So it's surprising. We would be thinking the folk who'd be anxious are the ones who are still on furlough, wondering if they've got a job to come back to. The anxiety seems to be, at the moment, as far as I'm seeing it, across the board. And that's just something we didn't expect. We thought folk coming back to work would be excited. And just as Kenny's saying, they're out and about, they're with people again, they're seeing people, albeit you're not touching them. But we thought they'd be fine and they'll settle back into a good routine. The other fear they've got, as well as that anxiety, is a personal fear of not doing well, and maybe a fear of losing their job because they're not performing at the level that they might have been performing at previously, and the fact that the jobs are now maybe more competitive. And so some people are saying that they're frightened that they might get paid off because they're not doing a good job, because they know that somebody there in the background can come in and take it. So I think the stresses that we're seeing across the business are unexpected in some ways, and some obviously ones are expected just because of the fear of losing a position. But it's really quite surprising, I think, that the way things have gone. But I do genuinely believe, as we all must be waiting sort of for October coming around and wondering what's around the corner, as furlough, if it does finish then, as it's predicted to do so, the mass unemployment, and then I think, as Gary's sort of saying, that's when people are going to be turning for some form of solace, whether it's alcohol, whether it's gambling, whether it's whatever it may be they can find, just to help get them through that next stage of worry, which is a short-term fix, as you described quite rightly, but it's not the long-term answer, of course, to get them there. But still very worrying.
Yeah, indeed. It's not, alcohol's never the answer, but it's often the, short-term solution. It's a tricky one. Marco, where are you these days, and what are you finding out there? Because you've got a lot of experience, you know a lot of people. What's your experience of all this at the moment?
Well, it's a very humbling and harrowing experience. If you take the recruitment process for even baseline jobs, and I'm now going from large enterprise to small enterprise, but one small business in which I've taken a partnership, a luxury boutique hotel in St Andrews. The moment that you're advertising for, very humble positions, as in a night porter position, you receive 250 CVs, and 40% of that are greatly overqualified. The whole of middle management in our sector has gone, and that middle management sector is now looking for really basic positions. and you're trying to be kind, you're trying to see or Zoom as many people as you possibly can, and trying to be fair, but at the same time, you know that you can't give those positions to people that are way overqualified because they're just trying to secure something. So that leads to there is a great financial insecurity. People in hospitality are not famous for saving, pay to mouth. So I get paid at the end of the month, I'll pay the rent, I'll pay the mortgage, I'll pay everything else. So our colleagues in hospitality are not used to saving. So there is great financial insecurity. And then going back to what Gordon was saying earlier, great insecurity, because the speed of change that we have to implement in businesses is incredible to make businesses viable. So we are implementing changes to make sure that businesses can stay afloat. But those changes are fine on paper and are fine in execution, but they're making the team members feeling insecure, feeling vulnerable, feeling, will I have a job at the end of this process? The third is a sense of, is a split between people like, well, all of us at the moment, I can see your background, probably with the exception of Kenny. Right now, we're all speaking from either a bedroom, a living room, or somewhere. So we're all privileged because we can operate from home. But there are the team at the coalface with guest serving. They don't have that option. So there is that degree of anxiety in terms of have we put all the things in place to keep not just our guests, but our team members genuinely safe. And last but not least, there is the demand on the frontline teams in terms of the heavy duty day-to-day operation that has doubled since the changes pre-COVID-19. So if I take the examples of my colleagues in Italy, the season is still going strong, another couple of weeks, but they've operated with a third of the team members that they used to have in 5-star luxury operations. The team members are, how do we say in Scotland? They're done. They haven't got any more energy left. And their fear is, I need to keep going. I need to go back to work, even if I'm ill, even if I can't even walk properly, because I've been working 18 hours a day, but I have to, otherwise I may get fired. So these 4 things put together are putting an unprecedented strain, not physical only, but mainly what I call the software. So the software is really, really fragile at the moment. And I think that individually we may do our very best, but I think that we need to do more. I know I have to do more for the people I know and are around me because it's not sustainable.
Thanks, Marco. Yeah, it's some food for thought there. Michael, your European Hotel Managers Association hat on, what are you hearing from over that side of the sea?
Actually, Gary, thank you very much for that introduction. That was really good. I don't actually have a lot, Alex, from Emma on this topic, and it's certainly a topic that would be interesting to raise with them, because you're going to have some different cultural situations overseas in the various countries, and I will follow that up. But listening to Gary talk, there were 3 things that came to mind. First of all was something that's been termed as compassionate redundancy, and it's somebody coined that phrase. I think credit goes to Jane Sunley of Purple Cubed, who wrote a paper, and it entered into a discussion we were having with the Umbrella Training Organization, which handles about 400 apprentices, many of whom, of course, have been let go. They were the low-hanging fruit. And Umbrella are keeping in touch with the apprentices and organizing some Zooms with people like us who can sort of listen, advise. And what is coming out is the need for hotels and restaurants who are letting people go to do so with some compassion. My son was made redundant from a major hotel chain. I won't go into all the details, but would you believe he never heard any communication from, I think it was in March when they first flagged it up, March or April, until they finally got their redundancy notices, 64 of them, in July. No communication from the general manager of the hotel, a major London hotel, who should be ashamed, and no communication at all. And what came out of these talks with the apprentices was things like survival guilt. And Gary, I'm sure Gary will know this, that apparently, the people left behind when their mates have been made redundant, they start feeling guilty because they're still here and their mates have gone. And how do they face them afterwards? So they term that survival guilt. And I think it's beholden on employers to somehow let people go. Obviously, people unfortunately will have to be let go, but to do it with compassion and almost create via HR or another team what I call a lifeline, so that when people have let go, they can in fact get back in touch with their former employer for advice on CVs or any advice. Don't just cut them off and let them go, because the worst thing will happen is that those people will never return to hospitality when come Brexit we're desperate for them, and hopefully business picks up again. So I think it's how we let people go, how we retain the lifeline, so that when business does start picking up, we can in fact bring them back again. But the second point that came up from Gary, which resonated enormously with me, was alcohol and substance abuse. Back in the day, Hospitality Action used to run a tremendous scheme where one of their team would go out to hotels, and the hotel would invite them in, and they would speak to all of the staff about drug and alcohol abuse. There is a terrific guy who, although he's not working for Hospitality Action anymore, is still out there with the colleges, and his name's Ken Crossland. And we used to get Ken to come into the Churchill Hotel, and he would talk to all the staff. We do this perhaps once a year, perhaps twice a year. And he's a recovering alcoholic himself after 20 plus years. So he talks very openly. And it was amazing, after his talks, there was always one or two people who came up to him afterwards quietly and said, "Ken, I think I've got a problem." And for the sake of that one or two people, we said, wow, I'm so glad we did that. Perhaps it's time for that again, in some form or other. I think it was one of those, as a leader, one of those sort of diligent care things one does to make sure, not just a tick box exercise, but to actually you realize when you did it, and you expose your staff to these talks, and it did some good. And that's something I sort of highly recommend that we think about again somehow. I'm in touch with Ken still. If anyone is interested, I know he'd be delighted to come and talk to individuals or teams, and it really did some good. Last but not least, already touched on, is these poor frontline staff are having to deal with the most abusive and intolerant of awful people who are coming back into hotels, restaurants and pubs and really giving a go at the poor frontline people. And that's something I think as leaders one should be aware of, and make sure there's a terrific support mechanism somehow, if that rears its ugly head, that there are people around to sort of say, get out, we don't want you here. And they can't do that, but the boss can sort of take control of that. But, this in the intolerant, having to deal with the intolerance of people is, I feel very sorry for them.
Yeah, no, you're right. It beggars belief that there are people out there that that can subject workers to that, but it's not going to help it's not going to help anyone. The workers aren't going to respond to it. They can't change the rules. They can't change the laws. They're not going to serve them any quicker. They just have to go through this. Gary, your entire company, your enterprise is based largely on going into workplaces and helping people to provide them with the tools to deal with kind of situations like that, isn't it? And to focus on their own positivity and mental health to get over situations like that. Is that fair?
That's right, yeah. We are very much trying to deliver interventions there that are helping people to increase self-awareness, how to give people the tools to self-manage their well-being so that they can manage what the mind's doing, not to be too reactive in the way that they operate, be aware of behaviours, be aware of triggers that then create behaviours. And this is, we're seeing a lot across society now. I've been observing a lot of things, not just in my work, but online, social media, and there's a lot of division there between people who have got contradicting views of the virus situation generally. We've got people who are very fearful, and that is displaying itself in quite challenging behaviour. Intolerant behaviour, as Michael highlighted, is a really good update from everybody who was listening intently there. What we're seeing in society now is a lot of difficult things rising to the surface and airing themselves, and I think it's bringing with it opportunity. And the opportunity is for us to try and live a different way, to try and spend a bit more time developing self, and to try and keep growing as a person and evolving as a person, and really looking at what are the things that are going on within me that have made this a difficult experience, and trying to turn towards that rather than turn away from it and maybe, lose our sense of perspective and maybe kind of start to behave in unconscious ways. And the other thing that Michael highlighted, that was something that I had down in my notes here to mention, is that compassion is such an important thing for humanity right now. And kindness and compassion, well, I guess compassion is where we combine when we bring kindness to awareness. So when we get the awareness of something and we bring kindness to that, the result is compassion. And cultivating compassion within us is not something, we all have it, the ability to be compassionate within us. The brain has got that capacity to do that. But sometimes it needs to be cultivated. And mindfulness is one of the core things that we go into businesses and introduce them to. And that's one of the practices that can really help compassion to be cultivated and nurtured and displayed. And when that happens, it just means that we look at our fellow human in a way where we don't know what's going on for that person in their life. We don't understand the situations they may be faced with in their own lives, and the history to many other things they may be dealing with. And if we can start to get more leaders and management and employees in general to turn towards things like mindfulness and and compassion, and really cultivate that, it increases the increases the harmony and the cohesion and the wonderful things that can happen within teams, within organizations. So for me, it's a crucial thing for society to start to look at now as a priority.
Can I just, Alex, you're on mute. So I'm going to jump in while he's quiet. Thank you, Gary. That's great. You're spot on when you say, it's all about kindness and compassion. This anxiety, I'm sure you've all seen that. We've gone down into another form of restriction where we're not allowed, I think, more than 6 people. And I believe, well, I think we're supposed to already have had a bit of a broadcast about what that means. There's a lot of confusion around what these rules mean, and they change every day, and we don't know when they're coming and when they're not. So there is this anxiety. I just wondered, and touching on Marco's point, where you humbly sort of said business leaders are also under a huge amount of pressure to try and be this kind, be this compassion, and be there for their employees. But do you have any, from your experiences, any sort of practical go-tos for business leaders to help them to be these kind of people for their employees, because they're also struggling?
Is that question to me, Lauren, or is that to Marco?
Oh no, I was just touching on Marco's point, but to you, if you've got any sort of practicals that business leaders can, because they are also figuring it out themselves, and experiencing the same sort of worry that we all are.
It's a great question, and yeah, absolutely recognise that. This was one of my kind of final closing slide at the very top, was about how leaders actually can take care of themselves first, and that is fundamentally important, because the people who are running the business and maybe have the stress of the economic situation, the financial insecurity and the unknowns around that, and the pressures, and all of these things will chip away at people. So resilience and developing resilience is another core component of how we come through this individually and collectively. We can start to really develop that that sense of being able to be resilient in the face of adversity. And there's no kind of one solution to developing that, but there is very good training and awareness and education of how we can implement things in our lives to make us be more resilient, and how we can adopt more qualities that can really help us to see our way through this and come out of it very positively at the other side. And a lot of the stuff that we deliver in organisations really does address that. It focuses on that specifically. But I think in terms of how business leaders are looking after themselves, that's a big challenge, I guess, right now, because there's a lot of pressure on business leaders, as we've highlighted. And how do business leaders keep looking after themselves in a way that they can function, in the best possible ways to support their people? That I think involves, like what you guys are doing here, having people together in communities where there's support, where you can share things and get things off your chest. It's really important that people don't hold on to things and internalize things too much, because that can then lead to our ability to be resilient being impacted. The ability to express what's going on for us and being really open to do that. And another thing is to express our own needs, something that doesn't come so easily to people all the time, particularly males, to be able to express our needs in terms of what we need, what we're lacking, and how others around us can help us to feel that we're more in control of what's happening. So dealing with those things are really important, and exploring emotions too. These are things that people sometimes want to try and avoid and turn away from, but again, turning towards these things is another thing that mindfulness teaches through the teachings. It's about how we can get better at sitting with and allowing emotions to be there, to present themselves, honour them, and then let them go, so we don't hold on to things. So all of those things are, I can maybe speak to Alex about ways that I can try and share some useful insight with the group that might help in all of those regards.
That'd be great, thank you. Because I suppose for a lot of business leaders, this is the first time that they've actually been vulnerable in this way. And, you know, like you said, people are sitting at home, they've got family stresses, they've got financial stresses, and they've got business stresses. So I know some occupations like law and medicine, you have to leave the office at the office. And it's very hard, I think, in hospitality, we don't leave the office at the office. And how is that maybe how we need to be for our own survival now? Take up the solicitor's mindset and leave it at the office. I'm not sure.
Lauren, if I could add something there, something we're doing at Hospitality Health, we're about to roll out is mental health first aid training. And this is for supervisors and managers. And although the title might sound it's about training for our direct reports, what it also does is not only allow you to manage them, but it also helps you manage yourself and understand the mental health circumstances better. So this training is there to identify triggers and provide support in a compassionate way when we happen to see someone maybe sort of going off the rails, if that's the way of putting it. But what it also does do is it provides that support mechanism for managers and supervisors themselves to give them strategies and understanding really what's going on. And so that's something that I think maybe businesses and good employers are doing more of, and we're going to start to promote that starting from October in Scotland across the piece. So we'll see what happens with that.
Gordon, was that? Sorry, carry on, Lauren. I'll ask you.
No, I'm just saying that sounds really great and helpful. I'm just wondering how much harder it's going to be. Like Marco pointed out, we're fortunate and we're sitting in our homes. So how much harder is it going to be to identify those triggers or identify that need if you're looking at people from behind a screen? We don't have the advantage of being together and seeing each other for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, where those things might be a little bit more obvious.
No, you're quite right. Certainly it's there for frontline. If you're in the business, you're seeing people turning up, their behaviour patterns may be changing. They go from being normally chatty to being quiet, or it could be the opposite, from being quiet to being very talkative. You know, sometimes the opposite is a signal that it gives you. So you're right, if it's working through a screen, it's difficult to see that and anticipate that. But putting that sort of aside, I do think what we're also finding, and Gary's alluded to a wee bit, that males used to not talk about things, but now we're starting to talk a bit more. So I think when we have these compassionate conversations, people nowadays are going to be becoming more open and to share the reasons why they're unable to come in or what's troubling them. I think that's now becoming easier for them to communicate. But what might be difficult is for supervisors, managers to then manage and cope with how they reply to that and what support they can put in place to try to get them back to work. But also likewise with the redundancy we've been talking about there, and I think it was Michael that mentioned it, we're going to lose these people. Umbrella Training are doing a great job at keeping in touch with them to try and provide support to bridge the gap to getting the next job. And I think that's hugely important, and if we're able to be compassionate in dealing with that, and part of the mental health first aid training is about that, to provide that empathy, if you like, when you're dealing with these people in a difficult way. It should help keep these people within the industry and hopefully get them back in again in the springtime when things start to improve and we see business coming back.
I'm glad to hear that, because I think one of the worries was that people, because of this anxiety of losing their jobs, because of the pressures financially and just psychologically, that they're not opening up, that they feel too at risk to say anything to their businesses, because then I know from old lives, as a solicitor, you would never go to HR or to your business and say, sorry, I'm having a meltdown. Do you mind if you just, be a little bit gentle with me at the moment? Because the first thing that would happen is that they would, take your contracts away and put you in a little office somewhere until you were better. So this isn't really, it's not really in our human nature to want to put our hands up and go, actually, I'm struggling. Can you please look after me better? Because then you think, well, they'll just replace me with someone else. And we know, like Marco said, there are a lot of somebody else's out there. So are we going to be as open with our feelings and emotions as we maybe should be? I'm just being devil's advocate.
I think it depends on the employer, doesn't it? Largely. Yeah. It depends on how understanding your employer is and the level of confidence you feel as an employee to be able to, and the relationship you have with them. You know, some people who are stuck with employers or companies that don't, not necessarily tolerate, but don't sympathise with that sort of issue, probably will keep it bottled up. Whereas there are probably equal amount who have understanding bosses and understanding management teams who desperately seek that out.
True, that's the trust piece comes in. And I suppose, Gordon, that's where the charity piece comes in, so that you're available for people who don't feel confident in themselves and their employees, or the trust, or they do trust their employers, but they just feel too at risk to be honest.
That's right. One of the other things we've done with the charity, we've only been going just over sort of 14, 15 months really, is we've been trying to convince employers to be more compassionate and understanding. This is way before COVID started, of course, and a number of them were presented with wellbeing certificates because they have come across with good information, providing us with that detail that we can award them the certificate to say they are an employer of choice that will look after individuals if they're going through a difficult time. They maybe have an EAP in place, an employee assistance program in place. The one we recommend is Hospitality Action, and I know that Michael has mentioned that company with Mark Lewis is the chief exec of before. So we're promoting that. And so we have seen a number of businesses making sure they get the weekend off, 1 in 4, so they can attend family parties. And we know our industry, very often you can't go to the parties at the weekend because you're working. So there are some businesses doing the right thing. Perhaps also open for a 5-day week, not a 7-day week. The same team's on duty all the time. So it's just that there are, as Alex has said, there's some businesses doing things differently, which I have to say is the right thing, to look after their teams in a more supportive fashion. And that's been happening to develop. This has come along, stuck in the middle of the whole thing for businesses were starting to change. And I suppose they've now got a chance of taking their foot off the pedal and wondering what now they can manage and cope with under the financial circumstances. And sometimes maybe it's not quite as nice to do the right thing as opposed to the economic thing, and that's where Gary comes in to help us all out.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I mean, that's a really great conversation there. I've been just a couple of things that kind of popped into my head is that, that's such a tricky period for employers thinking about investing in mental health interventions potentially for staff during a period of economic distress and uncertainty. But it's important, I think, to offer as much as you possibly can. And the thing here, there's a lot of few studies, really good studies that have been done around what are the kind of main indicators of creating a happy, healthy, and high-performing workforce. And one of the key indicators is creating an environment of psychological safety. And if we prioritize creating an environment of psychological safety, then what comes from that is how productivity improves, how cohesion improves, just loyalty, the whole lot is goes up markedly. And when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about things like actively trying to reduce the stigma around mental health. We're talking about leaders role modeling vulnerability in front of their workforce, where we actually share courageously from our own experience of times where we've maybe felt, vulnerable or felt like life was difficult. And because what that does is it allows the workforce to actually think that it's okay for them to do the same. And when they feel like they can express more openly, it's like letting air out of a balloon. A lot of people that are kind of internalizing difficult things and don't feel they can say anything about them in the workplace. When they feel like they can bring their whole selves to work and they can really be more open, then it has a magical impact on that individual, but also on others around them as well, because everybody else feels like they can be more themselves too. So we let the guard down. We let go of any kind of identities that we might create that keep us operating under pressure. And we also get a sense that we can be who we are without fear of judgment. And when people feel that they can do that, then again, that's a really, really massive thing for the the culture within a workplace.
I'm on mute. You'd think after 4 months. You would think after, you'd think after 4 months, I'd have learned where the mute was. My God, I need to talk to someone about that. Gary, help. Jane, can I bring you in? Because I noticed you were nodding there, and I'd just like to get your thoughts from your side.
A lot has resonated today for me, and I've made loads of notes. Gary, when you were speaking there most recently about resilience and vulnerability, that's, I think the public sector has come a long way, believe it or not, and that's kind of conversations that we have. So we've actually had some resilience support in the past few months, and my own chief executive is very keen on that whole vulnerability discussion, and you know, the Brené Brown books are passed around the office quite frequently at the moment, so it's good to see. I think that the conversations are happening for the first time. I was in the office yesterday, and a girl from another team was in the office for the first time, and that it started off as a water cooler, hi, how you doing, nice to see you, and turned into a 45-minute chat about how she's been really struggling. But we need to make time for each other, so that meant I had to put aside what I had planned, and I think that's absolutely what we need to be doing. I've been given a lot of thought as to how we lead our teams, and we've been very autocratic recently. We've had to be very direct and very clear around what we need to do, and we now need to go back to that, being curious and being more coaching driven. And I've had to try and tame my advice monster, which is very, very difficult because it's been out the box for quite some time. So I think there are a lot of changes that we're having to consider, but a lot that's been said about the frontline staff certainly resonates, because for me, you know, across Scotland, in terms of catering and cleaning staff, we've got about 15,000 caterers and 15,000 cleaners, about 2,500 janitorial staff. So it's big numbers, and they are quite literally on the front line just now. And those that have responsibility for cleaning in our schools are low paid, part-time, female employees. They have multiple posts. They have caring responsibilities for their elderly relatives and for their families, and we're putting them in the front line to tackle this. So what Kenny was saying about people having lost a bit of autonomy and decision making for themselves is absolutely the case. They're afraid. So we need to make sure that we're putting in support for staff who are very hard to reach at times. And the final thing I wanted to bring up that hasn't been mentioned is there something in there, Gary, about a rural versus urban isolation? Because for me, there's a lot of staff in rural areas who are already very isolated. So I think having 5 months now at home with very little contact is perhaps causing even greater problems. So I don't know if that's something that people have a view on, particularly across Scotland.
Yeah, I think that I'm seeing a couple of different aspects to this. There is the people who are in rural areas but enjoy being in and around nature in the countryside and wherever it is that they're near, and they're actually feeling like they can get some solace from the environment that they're in. And then we've got the other side of that, where people maybe were used to being in and around people in their work and things like that, and they've been detached from that environment and they are craving the human connection. So there's definitely different components at play here for sure. And then there's the people from the city who are, you know, in the city, maybe locked up in flats most of the day and just want to get out into nature. And they, you know, they probably are wishing that they were living in rural areas. So very much different sides to that coin. But I think, yes, I think generally one of the biggest contributing factors, whether it be children, young people or adults, is this greater disconnection between us as humans that is causing anxiety and deterioration of our sense of well-being, because, you know, we are, as humans, we're built to connect and to socially connect and get that real nice feeling from one another that we do when we interact well with one another. So that kind of, you know, those components have definitely been, have had adverse impacts on our young people and also on adults too. And so I think these are these are things that we need to think about how we can get that back, because one thing that I can see is huge automation through technology coming downstream right on the back of this situation that we're in just now. And it doesn't look particularly inspiring to me in terms of how it's going to bring humanity together so that we can get back to hugging one another and being more connected and loving. And ultimately, that's what we need. And I think it's time for society to really challenge what we're seeing as people telling us this is the way it needs to be, and trying to find a way of doing that with love and saying, yeah, we hear about all the stuff you're saying, but when we look at the data, this is what the data's telling us. Are there certain people in society we need to take more care of because they're vulnerable? Largely, the rest of the population must, at some stage, be encouraged to get on with their lives and try to really start to uplift society again. Because if we don't step forward, in that way, then we're going to be at the mercy of technology and other things that might cause us more problems. So that's just a kind of personal feeling I have. I don't know if anybody else is, can see that too.
You're spot on, I think, Gary, with that. Paul, could I bring you in? Because you've got a lot of clients who are small businesses, relatively vulnerable. Okay, they don't have the big overheads and liabilities of the larger ones, but still, they probably feel quite alone, do they? I couldn't get to your call. Was it yesterday you had it? You're on mute, like I am sometimes. There you go. Hello.
I'm getting a mucking fuddle as well. I'll come back to that. I mean, I've got loads of notes here, most of which I can't read, as you know, my handwriting's absolutely bloody awful. But yeah, I mean, that is a good point, Alex, and one of the points I've made here, a good part of the conversation we've had this afternoon has been probably quite rightly so, talking about organisations where there is a hierarchy and an infrastructure of employees working, to management and ultimately to board of directors, etc. A huge part of the hospitality industry, of course, doesn't work in that way in any way, shape or form. A large portion of the hospitality stock are one-man, two-man bands, husband and wife. And they're trying to work through this the best way they can with absolutely no support infrastructure whatsoever in the way that all you guys have described. And credit to everybody that's recognised that that's needed and made it accessible to employers and whatever. But say these group of people just do not have access to that sort of resource. You and I have had many conversations, Alex, right the way back, or 5 months ago, and I said right from the beginning of all this, the only way we're going to get through this is to help each other, and that has been resounded certainly throughout this meeting, but throughout most of the meetings that we've had, and indeed a lot of meetings that I've been involved in elsewhere. But there really is a huge issue here with one and two man bands that just do not have a resource to lean on in any way, shape or form. And just this week, with the announcements that are coming through and people using, their imagination and perhaps common sense, there is beginning to feed through the system. After the hype of the to help out scheme and all the buzz that came with it, as we look towards tonight's drawing in and the weather going pear-shaped and what have you, there is quite a mood of despair out there, and I don't make an apology for that. I know that we ended last week with Alex saying we wanted to finish on a positive note, and I failed miserably then, and I'm afraid I'm probably going to fail miserably as well now. There are people out there that really don't know where to turn to, and they're really, really frightened. And we've tried to offer some solace where we can, but I'm not a psychologist either, and but you know, there is a real issue out there. I think ultimately, from a political and strategic point of view, ultimately there's going to have to be a decision made. Is it a health crisis we're dealing with, or is it an economic crisis we're dealing with? And I think we've got to make our minds up which is going to cause the most damage. I really do. Whether the governments have got the will and the capacity to work that one through, I don't know. But I've just been messaged by a client of mine who's just saying that they really don't know where to turn to now. They're now seriously, after what's gone on this week, they believe that there will be a hospitality lockdown, certainly in Scotland, by the middle of October. A total lockdown. So there is real worry and despair, and as I say, Gary, if you can help me to help these people, I'd be more than happy to do so, because they don't have a support mechanism of any description whatsoever.
Wow. Happy to speak to anybody about that.
Yeah, well, you know what? There's the positive right there. You know, trying to get positive out of this thing. This little group of people, Wednesday afternoon, have just made a connection between the two. Gary, I'm sure you'll be able to help Paul. He's got a lot of contacts. Both of you do. And if that's the good that can come out of this 1 hour, then it's worth it. But also,
I absolutely agree with you. I mean,
sorry?
They're really valuable, these things, Alex. That, you know, they've been so useful over the last few months. You know, if you just pick up one thing out of these sessions each week, and you can take it somewhere and say, oh, by the way, I had a chat here and somebody gave me this idea, or what do you think about doing this? Or it makes a huge difference, because ultimately, as I keep on saying, the way we will get through this, and we will get through it, but the way we're going to do it is by helping each other. And I genuinely believe that.
Great. Thank you, guys. We are running out of time very quickly, but Gary, I wanted to bring you in, Gary Atkinson. Have you got anything from the Chambers of Commerce perspective?
Well, certainly I'll touch base with Gary, because I think it's something we could network out to the network CEs and offer the opportunity to connect. I think, Gordon, I quite like the idea that you said about that training session. And it might be an idea for you to consider putting something through the flow module system, because obviously there's more and more training being delivered online. I don't know about you, Kenny, but certainly in the hospitality and hotels, we were moving more and more towards that method of training where it's in people's own time. And with it being in their own time, they might pick up some of the key messages that you guys are giving out. You know, I'm probably going to get this stat wrong, Gary, but I was listening to the radio this morning and they were talking about suicides. And I think it was Scotland, and I think it was 5,500 suicides last year, of which 4,500 were men. They went down, they then categorized it into age groups. I can't remember that. But I think if we get some key messages over early on to the younger guys or people just on general training, but also, is there a way, Gordon, we can try and get something into the Kickstart scheme? Because obviously there's this wrap-round session that the government are giving 1,500 quid to businesses. Is there something we can actually feed into that wrap-round to do with this whole mental well-being? Don't know. But certainly on a practical side, you know, for those of you who obviously know that I came out of my business in January, and I really think about this a lot. How would I be coping now, my team, 30 or 40 people? Take what you're saying, Paul. You know, nobody's helping us as the small SMEs. Nobody's actually saying, you know, all the challenges that we've gone through and keep going through, because it's not over yet. You know, mainly cash flow, as we know. It always revolves around cash flow. You know, and ultimately, there's so much responsibility on that director, that owner, to try and get the messages out that we'd all like to get out to our staff, but sometimes the messages don't come across the way we want them to come across. Because the pressure that we're under. But certainly I would take away, certainly from the Chamber's point of view, Gary, I'll certainly touch base with you and see if there's something we can do to try and get that message out to the network. There's 12,500 members. In our industry alone, that's 45,000 staff the Chambers represent. So if we can get something to these guys, you know, that'd be good.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gary. One final point from Marco. He's talking about the economy versus health, and Sweden leading the way. There's just by prioritising both the overall health, including mental health of their country, alongside the economy. And it's going to have to be, I think Paul was saying it's one or the other. I can't make that call. I don't know which one it would be. It's prioritising health. I think it has to be, my grandma always used to say, what price health? And I've never forgotten that. It's just what price health, because if you're not healthy, you can't work. There is no economy. So I think we should, maybe end on that. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. It's another hour of Zoom. We've all got enough Zoom in our lives. Hopefully it's helping. And thank you for your comments. It's really good to see you. And we'll keep this going. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Wednesday. Thanks, Gary.
See you next
Thanks,
week.
everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.